My friends, please subscribe to my channel, like the video, and write a comment, and we begin. Part 1. When I asked my parents to borrow their car for one night, they said no. It wasn't the no of a parent who's worried about their kid's safety or the condition of their precious vehicle. It wasn't even the no of a parent who just doesn't feel like being inconvenienced. This was a no delivered with the force of a Category 5 hurricane, a no that reverberated through the very foundations of our perfectly ordinary suburban home. It was a firm, unwavering, absolutely not, under any circumstances, don't even think about it kind of no. And trust me, with my parents, that kind of no was rarer than a solar eclipse. The whole situation was bizarre, almost offensively so. I pride myself on being the epitome of the responsible teenager. Straight as part-time job at the local bookstore, volunteer work at the animal shelter every Saturday. My resume practically screamed model citizen. And I'm not a wild driver either. I'm the girl who signals meticulously, checks her mirrors 3 times, and probably drives 5 miles under the speed limit. I'm more likely to cause a traffic jam from cautiousness than recklessness. The need was legit too. Jessica, my best friend since kindergarten, had managed to score tickets to see her favorite band, Cosmic Fury, at a venue about an hour away. My own car, a trusty but undeniably decrepit Honda Civic, had decided to stage a dramatic revolt. Lately, it had been emitting a series of unsettling noises, the most recent of which sounded suspiciously like a dying walrus gargling gravel. I wasn't about to risk it on a long drive, especially not with Jessica's concert dreams hanging in the balance. And there it was, sitting in the driveway, gleaming under the afternoon sun, my parents' pristine, barely touched SUV, a luxurious behemoth that they only used for grocery shopping and the occasional Sunday drive to visit my grandparents. It was practically begging to be driven, its leather seats practically whispering promises of comfort and reliability. All I needed was one night. Just a few hours of temporary vehicular liberation. But no. My parents, David and Carol, stood united in their refusal, their faces set in a way I hadn't seen since I accidentally broke their prized porcelain cat collection in 2nd grade. They said it was out of the question that the car was needed that night. When I pressed them for details, for some semblance of a reasonable explanation, they clammed up tighter than a miser's fist around a dollar bill. "It's just unavailable, Sarah," my mom said, her voice tight. "Yes," my dad chimed in, his gaze darting nervously around the room. "It's a scheduling conflict. We need it." They wouldn't elaborate. They just exchanged this incredibly bizarre, intensely meaningful look, a look that suggested they were harboring a secret so profound, so earth-shattering, that revealing it could unravel the very fabric of reality. It was like they were characters in a bad spy movie, guarding some top-secret information that I, the innocent bystander, couldn't possibly comprehend. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. My parents were librarians and accountants. What would they possibly need the SUV for that couldn't wait or be explained? The whole thing was ridiculous. But what worried me was that it made me worry for the first time about my parents. Something was up, and I was determined to find out. Part 2. The sting of their denial lingered long after they'd retreated to their usual evening routine. Jeopardy droned on in the background, the comforting rhythm of questions and answers failing to soothe my growing unease. The more I replayed the conversation in my head, the more convinced I became that something profoundly weird was going on. My parents, David and Carol, weren't exactly known for their spontaneity. In fact, their lives were so meticulously structured, so firmly rooted in routine, that you could practically set your watch by them. Dinner at 6:30 sharp, consisting of some variation of meat, potatoes, and a vegetable, prepared according to my grandmother's ancient, time-tested recipes. Jeopardy at 7 o'clock, followed by an hour of reading before lights out at 10 o'clock. On weekends, they'd tackle household chores, meticulously clean the garage, and maybe take a scenic drive to visit my great-aunt Mildred, who collected porcelain dolls and had a penchant for rambling stories about her cats. Their world was predictable, reliable, boring, even a comforting, if somewhat stifling, haven of normalcy. So, the idea of them having some secret nighttime activity that required the urgent, unexplained use of their SUV was unsettling, to say the least. It was like discovering that your mild-mannered neighbor was secretly a world-class spy, or that your kindly old grandmother moonlighted as a professional wrestler. It just didn't compute. I started observing them more closely, turning into a self-appointed surveillance expert in my own home. It was like watching a nature documentary, studying the subtle behaviors of a previously unremarkable species. I began documenting the ways in which their routines had altered. They were acting strangely, whispering to each other in hushed tones in corners of the house, conversations that abruptly ceased the moment I entered the room. They'd jump when I spoke to them, their eyes widening with a startled expression that seemed entirely out of proportion to the situation. And then there were the phone calls. Long, mysterious phone calls taken in hushed tones, often late at night or early in the morning, always out of earshot. They'd sneak off to the garage, the basement, even the backyard, their voices dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. When I asked who they were talking to, they'd offer vague, unconvincing explanations. It was just a wrong number, honey, or, oh, it was just a colleague from work talking about some boring accounting stuff. I wasn't buying it. Not for a second. My parents had become characters from a movie I had never expected to be in. Were my parents living some kind of double life? It all felt surreal, like the beginning of some bizarre, twisted thriller. The more I thought about it, the more paranoid I became. I had to know what they were hiding. The image of my parents with some other family flashed through my head. The thought alone almost sent me running to Jessica's. I needed to know what these strange feelings were. Was I jealous and afraid they would find a more interesting version of myself? This needed to stop, and I needed to know what they were hiding. Part 3. One night, fueled by a potent combination of suspicion and teenage angst, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers, and I was willing to risk everything to get them. I formulated a plan, a daring and slightly ridiculous scheme that involved deception, stealth, and a healthy dose of breaking and entering, sort of. I pretended to go to bed early, feigning exhaustion after a particularly grueling shift at the bookstore. I put on my pajamas, brushed my teeth with excessive vigor, and made sure to turn off my bedroom light with a theatrical sigh. I wanted my parents to believe that I was safely tucked away in dreamland, blissfully unaware of their clandestine activities. I waited for what felt like an eternity, lying in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I tossed and turned, listening intently for any sound that might indicate my parents were preparing to leave. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the house fell silent. The rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, which usually lulled me to sleep, now seemed to amplify my anxiety, counting down the seconds until my daring escapade began. I crept out of bed, careful to avoid the squeaky floorboards that always betrayed my movements. I tiptoed down the stairs, holding my breath with each step. The house was eerily still, the only source of illumination the faint moonlight filtering through the windows. I felt like a character in a heist movie, navigating a laser grid with my life on the line. I peeked into the living room. Empty. The television was off, the room shrouded in darkness. I checked the kitchen. Spotless as always. My mother was a fanatic about cleanliness, and even in the middle of the night, the kitchen gleamed with an almost sterile perfection. Then, I noticed something that sent a jolt of adrenaline through my veins. The back door was slightly ajar, a barely perceptible crack that let in a sliver of cold night air. My heart leaped into my throat. It was happening. They were really doing it. Curiosity overriding my fear, I cautiously slipped outside, the cool night air sending goosebumps prickling across my skin. The backyard was enveloped in darkness, the only sound the chirping of crickets and the distant hum of traffic. I held my breath, scanning the landscape for any sign of my parents. Then I saw it, my parents' SUV, the object of my original desire and the source of all this madness, backing slowly out of the garage, its headlights cutting through the darkness like accusing fingers. I ducked behind a large, overgrown rose bush, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure my parents could hear it. I watched, transfixed, as they drove away, the taillights disappearing down the street, their destination unknown. The moment they were out of sight, I made a decision. I couldn't let them go. I had to follow them. I had to know where they were going and what they were planning. There was no turning back now. Realizing I had to act fast, I sprinted to Jessica's house, which, thankfully, was only a few blocks away. I banged on her front door, waking her up in a frenzy. After explaining the situation in a series of breathless, rambling sentences, she reluctantly agreed to lend me her car, a beat-up Toyota Corolla that smelled vaguely of stale pizza and teenage angst. Jessica owed me one anyway. She was skeptical. The story sounded like a TV show she would never watch, and yet, she had a sense that if she refused, something bad might happen. As I sped away into the night, the Corolla's engine sputtering and protesting, I knew I was embarking on a journey into the unknown, a journey that could change everything. Part 4. Borrowing Jessica's car, a dented Corolla with questionable brakes and a persistent smell of old gym socks, I set off in pursuit. The car rattled and groaned with every bump in the road, a symphony of mechanical misery that threatened to give away my position. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to maintain a safe distance without losing sight of my parents' SUV. This was no easy task. The SUV, despite its size, moved with surprising agility, weaving through the traffic with a purposefulness that both intrigued and unnerved me. They drove for what felt like an eternity, leaving the familiar comfort of the suburbs behind and venturing into the unknown depths of the city's outer limits. The streetlights grew dimmer, the houses became fewer and farther between, and the atmosphere gradually transformed from quaint suburban normalcy to a gritty, unsettling unease. The feeling that I was going down the wrong path was gnawing at me, but the need to know what my parents were hiding overwhelmed everything. Finally, they turned onto a narrow, unpaved dirt road, the SUV bouncing roughly over the uneven terrain. The Corolla, designed for smooth suburban streets, protested with a series of violent shudders, threatening to shake itself apart. I winced with every jolt, praying that the suspension would hold up. The road was dark and desolate, bordered by overgrown weeds and gnarled trees that seemed to reach out like skeletal fingers. It felt like a road leading to nowhere, or worse, to some forgotten corner of the world where dark secrets were buried. The dirt road led to a deserted industrial park, a sprawling wasteland of abandoned factories and crumbling warehouses that loomed against the night sky like the ruins of a forgotten civilization. The only light came from the faint glow of the moon and the distant flicker of city lights on the horizon. The scene was desolate and ominous, straight out of a horror movie. Abandoned warehouses loomed in the darkness, their broken windows like vacant eyes staring out into the night. The air was thick with the smell of decay, dust, and something else, something indefinable, but distinctly unpleasant. The silence was broken only by the rustling of the wind and the occasional screech of a distant owl. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. My parents parked their SUV in front of one of the largest and most dilapidated warehouses, its rusted metal walls scarred with graffiti and its roof partially collapsed. They got out of the car, their figures silhouetted against the faint moonlight. They were carrying something long and bulky. I squinted, trying to make out what it was. Shovels? I couldn't believe it. Shovels? What were my parents doing in a place like this, in the middle of the night, armed with shovels? The image of my parents digging a grave flashed into my head, sending a wave of nausea through me. This was beyond strange. This was terrifying. My parents were going to kill someone. The fear was paralyzing, and yet, a morbid curiosity compelled me to move closer. I had to know what they were doing. I had to know if my darkest fears were about to come true. It was time to confront the truth, no matter how horrific it might be. Grabbing the small flashlight from the Corolla's glove compartment, I cautiously approached the warehouse, ready to face whatever horrors awaited me inside. Part 5. Heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird, I crept closer to the warehouse, navigating the treacherous landscape of rusted machinery, discarded tires, and piles of crumbling debris. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the silence was broken only by the frantic thumping of my own heart. I peered through a large, jagged hole in a broken window, trying to get a glimpse of what was happening inside. The interior of the warehouse was dimly lit by a single bare bulb hanging precariously from the ceiling. Dust motes danced in the pale light, creating an eerie, almost ethereal atmosphere. And then I saw them. My parents. They were in the center of the warehouse, digging a hole in the concrete floor. The scene was surreal, almost dreamlike. My mild-mannered, suburban parents, digging a grave in a deserted warehouse in the middle of the night. It was like something out of a twisted comedy, except I wasn't laughing. But the horror didn't end there. Beside them, wrapped in a large sheet of plastic, lay a body. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was the moment I'd been dreading. My parents had killed someone. I took a shaky step back, my mind reeling. I couldn't process what I was seeing. My parents, murderers? It was impossible. And yet, there they were, shoveling dirt with a grim determination. This was wrong. So wrong. Tears streamed down my face. I watched as my parents continued to dig the hole. When the hole was big enough, they lifted the body and slid it into the hole. I gasped and almost screamed when I saw that the body had a note taped to its forehead. Gathering all my courage, I stumbled through the broken windows. All eyes in the building shifted to me. I felt a sense of relief, like I'd been holding my breath for a very long time. My parents ran over to me. Their faces were filled with a mixture of shock and relief. "Happy birthday!" everyone screamed. In the center of the hole was a mannequin from our garage that had disappeared a few weeks ago. My parents never killed anyone, though I was briefly terrified that they would kill me. There was a small note taped to its forehead, "Happy birthday." The whole warehouse was full of my friends and family. It turned out that I'd turned 18 that day, and the reason my parents refused to lend me the SUV was to throw me off. They didn't lend me the SUV because it was full of decorations, and they needed to be the ones to arrive at this location first. The mysterious phone calls were the friends and family helping my parents set this surprise up. As if reading my mind, my dad quickly said, "I was terrified that we wouldn't be able to get this done on time because we couldn't get the decorations in the SUV. It was so touch and go. I told you to give me a hint to where we were going," I said to them as I wiped my eyes. They looked at each other and shrugged. It was nice to know that they had given me a gift greater than my parents. Some perspective.